Apparently, Facebook doesn't like me recording this damn chapter, so it's kicked me off of the Facebook Live twice now. So this will be my third and final attempt. If this time doesn't work, then I'm just gonna have to figure something else out with it. So this isn't gonna be Facebook Live. This is just recorded and then uploaded because I'm tired of messing with it. So chapter 6, Fantastic Beast, as I've said twice before already now. Whenever this book was released, it was it climbed the top 100 new release list and ended up sitting 2 positions higher than J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beast. And I took that. I was thoroughly excited with that particular status because, well, the Harry Potter books are pretty awesome, and my book was sitting higher than that, so that was awesome. Anyway, I think that was a few redundant usage of the word awesome, but, whatever. That's why I hire editors. Anyway. Blue and silver light beamed through the large stained glass window overlooking the ancient throne. The colored rays splayed out, forming the perfect sigil across the marbled floor, interrupted only by the blue carpet running the length of the room. Baron Rimley de Leon's voice echoed across the grand hall from his elevated perch. Son, how many times must I tell you? Magic is not what our people need. They need to be led from a position of morality and strength, not some fool who rushes after the next holy grail. Or do I need to remind you how the outcome of that fable turned out? Father, hear me, please. I've done all the work. This is not some fool's errand. I had the information authenticated at the tower before it left. This is what our ancestors used to protect our lands. I'm just asking you to follow in their footprints, Eric pleaded, holding out the stack of parchment. Rimley sighed heavily and took the stack. Flipping through the pages, he skimmed the hundreds of scribbled words and occasional depictions. He was surprised at how much information was available on the subject. Strange that he'd never heard of it before now. Though his people were known to be prideful at times, it was likely they didn't wish to admit that they had needed help. Handing the parchment back to his son, he stood and stretched his legs. Very well. I will accompany you to Hero's Gate. We'll explore this little failsafe of yours, though I want you to promise me that if it turns out to be hogwash, you'll drop this pursuit and learn to lead as I have. Accepting the stack of research, Eric felt a tinge of success flow through him. You have my word. I'll have the horses readied. How many men do you wish to accompany us? Rimley paused, thinking over the question. Hero's Gate was just over a week's ride. He really didn't want to leave the throne empty for long. If he headed up King's Road, he could stop over in Aldridge and again in Marbane. From there, it was only 3 days to the wall, and he would reach the gate on the final day. Start with 50 men. I'm sure others will join us along the way. Steward, send an emissary to Aldridge. Tell them to expect us in 2 days' time. From there, we make for Marbane and to the wall after that. After our stop at Hero's Gate, we'll run the eastern pass back home. And trusting his orders were received, he marched along the blue carpet, muffling the sound of his boots. Reaching the entryway, he turned and disappeared. It was a long journey, and he needed to gather his belongings. Dust fell from the rafters, rousing him from his slumber. Looking up at the shaking beams, he could hear the cheers overhead. It was no doubt an exciting match. He could always tell from the volume. Sitting up, Crinan felt the healing wounds along his torso stretch their displeasure at his movement. Leather soles echoed off the stone, announcing visitors. It was a little early for another match. Why were they here, he wondered. Attempting to act as if he wasn't listening to their approach, he reached over and grabbed the wooden bowl resting beside his cot. Scooping the paste-like soup into his hand, he stuffed it into his mouth, filling the crunch between his teeth. No doubt a beetle had gotten in with the grubs. He hated when that happened. The shells always clung to his teeth when he chewed. It wasn't like he could refuse the food anyway. The food was food, and it would sustain him. Looking up from the bowl, he watched the 2 guards approach his cell. The closest one pulled a large brass ring and began searching for the proper key. Crinan watched the other one, his hand resting against the head of an axe. It was rare for them to gather him armed. This had to be a special occasion. Speaking the guttural tongue of his ancestors, the natural words felt good in his mouth. Why are you taking me out? I'm not scheduled to fight today. Plans change. You've been summoned. Special request from the chieftain. The armed guard clearly wasn't happy with the arrangement, but he wasn't going to be the one to go against the chieftain's orders. Finding a small silver key, the other orc dropped the others, letting the ring catch them. He shoved it into the lock and twisted. An audible click sounded and the barred door swung open. Crennan laid the bowl where it had been and pulled himself to his feet. His muscles were sore and the bandages around his midsection were stained in blood. I haven't yet healed from my last fight. Doesn't matter. This will be your last fight one way or another. You win, you go free. You lose, you die. Why? Crennan asked. The armed orc reached behind him and pulled the twin axes from his belt. Tossing them on the straw-covered bed, he nodded to the other guard to leave the room. The orc did so, hurrying to avoid penalty. You were brought here as punishment for your crimes against the Curran clan. None expected you to do so well in the pit. You made a lot of coin, which went to the clan you wronged. Victories have paid for that life many times over. And since you refused to die in battle, the clan has decided to let you go with one final expedition. Crennan stared in disbelief. He'd lost track of how long he'd been trapped, forced to fight as a gladiator. Now they were just going to release him? Who do I fight? You face Drognu, Terror of the Sands. The half-orc had heard the name in whispers, but it held no lingering meaning. He'd never seen the man before, though his stories were legendary. If he could kill this man, it would no doubt bring him honor for the rest of his life. No orc would refuse him station with such deeds attached to his name. Perhaps this was how he was going to rid himself of his cursed heritage. He reached down, securing his axes, and marched toward the door. Lead the way. They marched through the twisting labyrinth of tunnels held up by wooden supports and clay. Crennan couldn't help but dwell on the anxiety building inside him. He was torn between hope and fear. This would be the fight to decide which one ruled him. He recalled the few tales he'd heard of Drognu, and truth be told, they scared the shit out of him. If this man was truly as powerful as they claimed, he would be a difficult adversary. But he was the key to freedom. That alone would see him to success. Turning toward the large gates, he watched the change slowly pull the heavy portcullis up. The guard grabbed the pile of armor off the table and held it out for the half-orc to step into. Crennan laid his axes down and poked his head through the central hole, putting his arms through one at a time. The movement was torture, but he had to suffer through it. If anything, it would loosen him up for the fight to come. He felt the heavy layers of leather clap around him. The guard buckled the sides into place and took a step back. Be well, slave. Fight with honor, and you'll spend the rest of your days outside these confines. He offered a final salute to the half-blood and turned, leaving him to his fate. The orc's actions sent a sense of pride through him. It meant he'd made an impact, and that alone would be enough to boost his confidence. Crennan took a deep breath and secured his axes. Marching up the ramp, he heard the crowd erupt in cheers at his sight. He searched the large arena, hoping to get a glimpse of his opponent. The empty ring seemed odd. He was the challenger in this battle. That meant he would be the last to enter. Where is he? A deafening roar tore into his ears, sending shivers down his spine. He could have recognized that roar anywhere. Glancing up, he noticed the massive wings circling overhead, though the dragon didn't look quite right. Is that him? Nobody said anything about a dragon. Taking a deep breath, Crennan placed his axes between his arms and knelt down. Grabbing a handful of sand, he rubbed it into his palms, letting the coarse grit dry and add friction to his sticky grip. The chains lowered behind him, sealing the reinforced portcullis. Crennan wrapped his fingers around the leather-wrapped handles of his axes and marched toward the center. If this beast was his opponent, there was no sense in delaying it further. Another ear-shattering roar echoed overhead, and the creature began lowering. It touched down in the center of the ring, looking upon the small half-orc. Crennan watched it land. It was the strangest creature he'd ever seen. It stood roughly 8 foot tall, giving about a head and a half over the largest orc. But it had the head of a dragon and a long, thick tail. Several black spikes ran from its crown to the end of the tail, jutting out like vicious weapons of death. Serrated scales of dark green covered its body, overlapping at the joints. Its talons were completed with several razor-sharp claws, though the most disturbing thing of all was the bat-like wings folded neatly behind its back. As if it wasn't enough to be able to kill him with every part of its armored form, it had to be able to fly as well. In all rights, it had to be a dragon, but it stood upright like a man. If the creature stared into him as if it were assessing him, as he was it. If dragons had the ability to look smug, this one certainly managed to pull it off. A high-pitched hiss escaped its mouth, revealing a blood-red forked tongue. Crinan felt the pressure threaten to pop his eardrums. He had to find a way to escape it, or he was going to go deaf. Covering his ears, he watched the mist-like fog roll from the creature's nostrils. It pooled on the ground, making its way toward him. How can I survive this? I don't even know what it's capable of. The urge to do something, anything, overcame him. Abandoning all reason, Crinan charged, raising his axes. His battle shout echoed across the arena, exciting the spectators beyond control. Unconcerned with the need for air, he darted across the growing pool. It separated like a cloud in a breeze. Drognu hadn't expected him to charge. Most opponents fled from his toxins. They were always too afraid to risk entering. This one was different. He didn't seem to care. The half-orc was upon him quicker than he was ready for. Watching the axe's speed in toward him, he spun around, whipping his tail. The armored tail caught Crinan in the ribs. He felt them break once again, shooting pain throughout his body. Surely the fresh wounds had reopened from the impact as well. Slamming hard into the sand, he landed on his back. He felt the ground shake beneath the creature's massive weight. It was upon him before he could move. Staring the beast in the face, it towered over him, confirming its nefarious plot. Why is it always my ribs? The dragonkin broke its gaze, rearing back to stretch its thick, muscular neck. Sucking in large bouts of air, its lungs filled, ready to spew the lethal toxins atop the downed orc. His snout shot down, aimed at the pathetic half-breed. Why do they continue to give me such pathetic toys? It doesn't matter. I'm going to end this one quickly. And once I do, I'll return to my lair and count my treasures once again. They don't have anyone good enough to best me. These greenskins are lucky I even choose to play their little games in the first place. I could slaughter every single one of them if I so desired, but that won't fill my coffers. No, it's best to let them test themselves against me. I'll gladly take their riches. Who doesn't like resting upon a bed of jewels and gold? Not to mention the precious virgin sacrifices. He licked his lips, lost in thought. I'm going to stop there for a second. I've noticed my bad guys, for their inner monologue, is somewhat lengthy, so I think I need to fix that in the future. So, less inner monologue, more simple thoughts. If it's that important, they could always say it. So, anyway, just a note to myself more than anything. Crinan watched the creature's maw open slightly. He could see the green smoke boiling behind the pointed teeth. He had to move. If the dense fumes touched him, whatever it was, it most likely wouldn't be good for him. While searching for an escape, something caught his eye. A small gland rested near the underside of the creature's jaw. It wasn't any bigger than a walnut, but it looked soft unlike the rest of the large monstrosity. It was a long shot, but he had to do something. He had to survive. Ignoring the pain, Crinan lashed out, swiping his axes at the beast's throat. The blade tore into the soft scales, nicking the fleshy sack. A yellow liquid drained out, soaking into the sands. Drognu roared in pain. How did he cut through my scales? Even my softer belly scales were too dense for most weapons to pierce. This abomination must have keen weapons. They clearly aren't magic. Anger flooded him. He stepped back, sniffing at the small beast to make sure he hadn't missed anything. No, not magic. Not anything, for that matter. What are they made of? I've never smelled that ore before. Shaking his head, he reached up to soothe the torn venom sac. His forked tongue shot out, wetting his scaly lips. You're going to pay for that. And once you're dead, I'm going to add your weapons to my collection. Something that rare doesn't deserve to be in your filthy hands. Maybe I'll put your head between them and remember you by. Crinan couldn't deny the intelligence that the creature possessed. It was clearly more astute than the orcs gave it credit. How it knows my axes are Darstral, how did it know my axes are Darstral? Which is a ore that the Order of the Trident mines out of the Druafar catacombs, and that's what they use as their currency. And due to the material, they also make some weapons out of it, hence Crennin's axes. Prior to his axes, it was his greatsword, but his greatsword was forged down into the axes when he became a gladiator. So, just fun note there. More important, how am I going to defeat it? It's strong, fast, and smart. I can't match one, let alone all three. Picking himself up, he tightened his grips. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his only advantage. Calmly strolling toward the beast, he searched for any weakness, hoping to find one before it arrived. Give me 1 second, I got a damn cat beating at the door. What? Dragnu tried... Okay, the last thing he wanted to do was lose his only advantage. Calmly strolling toward the beast, he searched for any weakness, hoping to find one before he arrived. Dragnu tried forcing the poison from his throat, but it was of no use. The muscles were cut. They couldn't contract enough to force the venom into his windpipe. Not that he could build any up anyway. He would have to do this the hard way. Flexing his wings, he stretched them their full width. This cocky half-breed is taunting me. If he knew what was in store for him, he'd run to his death, not walk. You'd be smart to throw yourselves upon your axes now. It'd be less painful than what I'm going to do to you. He brought his wings in, flapping them harder and harder. The amount of force put into the motion was amazing. Such a display of brute strength was nearing the boundaries of natural. The heavy gust of wind lifted him off the ground, showering the half-orc in abrasive sand. He didn't have to try so hard once he was in the air. Pacing his wings, he lifted himself higher and rocketed into the sky. Nearing peak height, he leveled out and locked sights on the abomination below. He was but a speck at this distance. Adjusting his eyes, his vision shifted, giving him a much closer look. His death was going to be agonizingly slow. No one hurts me and lives to tell about it. Dragnu folded his wings, letting a free fall claim him. Twisting around, he brought the wings out to guide his attack. Extending his claws, he prepared to snatch the orc into the air. Crennin had trouble seeing through the sand cloud. The powerful gusts were fading, telling him the creature had taken flight, but he was blinded. Squinting against the flying debris, he searched the sky. A dark shape caught his attention. He could barely make out the creature's outline, but it was growing larger. It was headed straight toward him. It was moving too fast. There was no way he could withstand the impact. Glancing down at his weapons, he twisted and leaned back. Bringing his axe around, he threw it as hard as he could, letting loose at the apex of his swing. The lightweight, well-balanced weapon tumbled end over end, pausing briefly each time the head was at the lowest point. Crennin watched it tear into one of the fleshy wings, sinking to the handle. A sharp pain tore into his right wing. Dragnu glanced over, seeing the gaping hole in the web. One of the blackened axes was lodged in the bone. He hadn't expected the half-orc to sacrifice one of his weapons. He was coming in too fast. He had to slow himself. Flapping to control his descent, the wind couldn't catch the wind. Off balance, he spun around, unable to stabilize himself. Falling faster, he felt dizziness take hold. Adjusting with his good wing, he slowed the spin, but he couldn't do much else. The ground was rapidly approaching. Pulling his limbs in at the last moment, he crashed into the arena floor. A wall of coarse dust exploded all around him. Watching the incoming creature, Crennin rolled out of the way. He felt bits of sand hit him. Popping to his feet, he gripped his remaining axe. The pain in his ribs was great, but he had to ignore it for now. He could deal with it if he survived. Cautiously approaching the fallen dragon man, he searched through the cloud, hoping he could finish it before it got up. It was unlikely the height killed him. He would have to land the final blow for himself. He climbed up the mound of sand, looking at the half-buried beast within. Its eyes were closed, and one of the wings was jaggedly folded at an awkward angle, clearly broken. A fair amount of blood seeped from the punctured bone. He spotted his axe near the creature's tail. Only the handle was sticking from the sand. Raising his weapon, he inched closer, ready to remove the beast's head. Its slit-like eyes shot open, expanding to lock on the half-orc. Dragnu sprang to life, raking his sharpened claws at the approaching abomination. Pain shot through his body. The fall must have damaged him more than he'd realized. Crinan jumped back, narrowly avoiding the deadly swipe. He tripped over the uneven ground and tumbled down the small mound. The sand shifted beneath him, telling him the beast was freeing itself. It slid into the hole, filling the crater and trying to bring him along with it. He clawed at the sands, trying to stop himself. To his fortune, he stopped the sliding. Picking himself up, he turned and backed away, watching the broken beast crawl from the hole. Oh, how you will pay! I faced hundreds of creatures of every race, and never before have I bled. When I get my claws on you, I'm going to peel your flesh from muscle so you can experience every ounce of pain I can inflict. Only after I've eaten every part of your body you can live without will I allow you to die. Again, like I said, he's pretty wordy. So, Drognu stabbed his talons into the sand, balancing himself. One limb at a time, he made for the half-orc. Fear grew inside him. The beast was furious, and he was its only target. He knew he couldn't hold against him in melee. Taking a deep breath, he watched the creature's approach, unsure how he was going to win this fight. He felt heavy droplets splash against his bare arm. Looking down, he watched the water collect the dust and run off. Another drop hit, followed by a dense downpour. The rain soaked into everything, all but eliminating the cloud of dust floating around him. As if a sign from the gods, Crinan spotted the handle of his axe sticking from the sands just in front of the beast. Apparently, he wasn't the only thing that got caught in the sandslide. He felt his lips tighten, revealing a knowing smile to the approaching creature. You'll have to catch me first. Laughing in pleasure, Crinan charged, leaping into the air with his axe overhead. Is this Orkling stupid? Why is he charging me? I can shred him with ease. Bringing his clawed hand up, he watched the half-orc jump. He was still too far away to hit him. Ha! Too soon, you pathetic half-brit! Crinan slammed into the ground in front of the creature, bringing his axe down with all his might. It hit the handle of its twin, slingshotting the blade straight up into Drognu's chin. The sharpened edge cut into its brain, silencing his words. Drognu staggered, unsure what had just happened. He tried to catch himself, but something was wrong. He couldn't move. His limbs gave out, and he crashed face first into the sand, jabbing the war axe deeper into the underside of his skull. The torrential downpour stopped, emptying the last few drops over the battleground. Crinan quickly picked himself up and dusted the clinging sand from his bloodied leathers. Approaching the dragon man, he straddled his long neck and raised his axe. Bringing it down in a solid, fluid motion, he severed the head. Crinan the Undefeated! Crinan the Dragon Slayer! Crinan the Almighty! The crowd erupted in cheers of praise and excitement, having never seen such a battle. Grabbing his embedded axe, the head along with it, he calmly walked toward the gate, watching it raise for his approach. I'm free now, provided these damned orcs don't try anything underhanded and keep their word. Exiting the arena, he paused just inside the gate. It clanked down, trapping him in the small confines. Over a dozen orcs stood in the room awaiting him. They were armed with large axes, hammers, and spears, proudly displaying their thick metal armors. They had bear pelts secured to the shoulders as protection against the chilling northern winds. At least that's what he guessed they were for. These weren't guards. These were soldiers. From the look of him, they were his executioners. Drop your weapons and remove your armor, slave. Crinan looked over the orc. He was older than the others and wore finer armor with quality furs and hundreds of markings etched into it. He wasn't sure what it all meant, but if he had to guess, he was an orc of power. I was told I'd go free if I won. That means you no longer refer to me as slave. Crinan tightened his grips, knowing the embedded axe was next to useless in its current state. The elder orc cracked a smile at his rebellion. True enough, you've earned your name. Crinan, relinquish your weapons and armor. They'll be returned to you when you leave this city. He stared at the old orc for a long minute, unsure if he should trust him or not. How do I know you won't kill me the minute I pose no threat? You're a warrior. Even unarmed, you always pose a threat. But I'm an orc of my word. Your victory over Drognu has granted freedom, status, and wealth. Not only for yourself, but over this city. The beast has been hoarding treasures for decades. With his death, that treasure has become yours. Most of it, anyway. So please, drop your weapons. I give you my word, as chieftain of Tolgrim, they'll be returned to you once you're outside this city. A heavy sigh escaped him. I guess that has to do. Crinan dropped his axes, letting one clink to the ground while the other more squished. Unbuckling his armor, he laid it on the table and returned his attention to the chieftain. The orcs calmly approached and collected his belongings. Stuffing them into a large bag, they moved aside, exposing a doorway he'd never been through. Crinan marched past their number and into the corridor. It was nicer than the other ones he'd seen. This one actually had smooth walls and was decorated beyond nailed planks. They escorted him through the underground labyrinth to a set of wooden doors. Sunlight beamed through the seam at their center. Stepping through, he was lost in the sights around him. He'd never seen the York City before. It was strangely wonderful in a harsh sort of way. Were it not for his history with them, he could have found it a wonderful home. Outside the tunnel, the orcs marched on all sides of him, led by the chieftain. He kept watch on as many as he could. If they were going to execute him, they were going to be in for a wicked surprise. Making their way through the heart of the huge city, Crinan found himself studying the structures. It was a style of craftsmanship all on its own. The citizens were another story. For the most part, they ignored him, going about their daily lives. It was the younger orcs and the children that made him smile. They'd stared as if they knew who he was. Many joined the ranks, marching alongside the group, trying to keep him within their sights for as long as possible. He found it amusing. Occasionally, one of the children would work up the courage to run up between the soldiers and slap his leg, followed immediately by running away, fear in their eyes. He guessed it was some sort of challenge between them, an innocent way of proving bravery. It felt good to inspire them in such a way. It was certainly going to be one of those things he'd remember for the rest of his life. The group rounded the corner, stepping into a wooden tunnel. It twisted and went back the other direction as if it were some sort of defense if the city were under attack. Stepping through the other side, he spotted a large steel-reinforced gate. It towered over them, even in the distance. Reaching the massive portal, he could hear the chains inside the wall rattling. The twin doors cracked, displaying a large road on the other side. A wide bridge made of wood spanned over the long chasm. It was lined with a single rope run through the center of the rail post. Crinan stopped at the edge of the bridge and turned to address his The chieftain stopped at the edge of the bridge and turned to address the newly freed half-orc. Your freedom lies on the other side, half-orc. You've proven yourself worth... Your freedom lies on the other side. You've proven yourself worthy of being called an orc. From this day forward, you're welcome among our kind. He nodded to one of the soldiers. The orc dropped a large sack at Crinan's feet. It was nearly bulging at the seams. Crinan grabbed the bound opening and heaved the sack up to his shoulder. It had to weigh at least a few 100 pounds. Nodding to the chieftain, he took his first steps of freedom and marched across the bridge. Still in a gaze over the edge, his stomach churned at the sight. It had to have been several hundred feet to the deep blue waters beneath. Returning his eyes to the path, he reached the other side. Glancing back, he looked upon the orcs one last time. In unison, they offered salute and turned to re-enter their city. Crinan dropped the sack and pulled the leather binding free. Looking inside, he found his armor. It had been folded neatly and tucked around the axes. Pulling out his equipment, he readied for the long journey home. He looked inside the bag, finding a smaller sack and hundreds of gold coins and gems piled around it. Opening the smaller bag, Drognew's glazed eyes stared back at him. And that is the end of the chapter. We're going to get this uploaded and on Facebook and on YouTube both. And hopefully that'll be the last time Facebook Live kicks me off. That I don't get it. A few notes. The audiobook will be coming very soon. I know I've spoken about that a few times. In addition, the Order of the Trident 3 will be done very, very soon as well. I'm expecting to receive the manuscript tomorrow. At least that's what the editor told me the last time I spoke with him. I'll go over it, make sure that it's good enough. I'm tired of finding errors after the fact, so I will be going through the book very thoroughly before we publish it, because I'm tired of mistakes. So Order of the Trident 3 very soon. Audiobooks for all three of them very soon. other books that I've worked on over the past year or more will be coming out. And I'll keep you guys up to date as possible. So, you have a good night, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.